Okay, here we are on October 1st, walking out to the garden. Starting my garden video series at the end of the season. Here's some beets that we planted in late July. We had a real cool off in July, which made it possible to plant some beets. The lettuce you see there, I think that's called Butter Crunch. And there's a ruby in behind the Butter Crunch. It did not do as well because it did warm up again in August. It was an unusual cool spell in the middle of July. And there's some Dwarf Kale. I think that's probably similar to the stuff you get in the stores. It's a smaller leaf, a little more densely packed and more ripples in the leaves. This is an eggplant that's sprawled out quite a bit. You can see it's still trying to make a few before our first frost, which is actually scheduled to happen on the 15th of October here in Kansas City. Tomatoes, they're pretty much played out. With the snow that we got on the 1st of May, planting tomatoes happened pretty late. So I tried a new system that year, or this year, sorry, the 2013. I did the Back to Eden gardening technique using wood chips. And my wood chips, I actually spread them in the fall of 2012 and hoped that they were fresh from the tree trimming service, and I had hoped that they would break down a little bit, at least over winter. And they really slowed down growth in the spring. I had a really late planting because of the fall, or because of the spring snow in May, and that combined with the wood chips, I only got one harvest really out of the tomatoes, and that was late. Most of it really in August. And cilantro you see there, and some kale. Again, those are all fresh plantings. And then moving into the more mature section of the garden here, the jalapenos. Jalapeno plants actually did well. They didn't get as big, but they were very productive. And they look really healthy. When I was just using straight compost, I think the soil was too rich for them, and they actually burned. But I've already harvested a lot of the jalapenos off of this plant as they come ripe, and I give them away to our yoga students. And they're surprised because they're not used to seeing red jalapenos. Everybody asks me what kind of pepper they are. And I said, well, it's a jalapeno, but you don't see them red and ripe like this in the grocery store because they don't keep as long. So they pick them green, so they can ship them across country, and and then they'll keep for a month or even longer at the grocery store. Here is this is all, I believe, Georgia Jet sweet potatoes, sweet potato vines, and I knew they were going to really spread, so I gave them the space they needed. And whenever they kind of invade or start growing into a section that I don't want, like here they're kind of heading in, I just pick up the vine and I just toss it back. They say you can cut them off, but it's not necessary to cut them. I was looking for some of the beautiful flowers that these make. Probably have to come back in the afternoon. Well, there's one. So that one's kind of small, not nearly as pretty as they can be. And then over here we have the Dino Kale, Senado Kale. And this particular one was really productive. And then there are some slightly smaller ones. But it makes some pretty good sized leaves. I'll just put my hand down here so you can kind of get a feel for how big the leaves are. Again, we end up giving a lot of this away to the yoga students, and they're blown away because the leaves are just bigger than the stuff you get in the grocery store. Here's one of the Dino Kale that makes, a smaller leaf, maybe a little more comparable. This one as well, maybe a little more comparable to what you get in the grocery store. Back in the distance there, you'll see a fig tree. That's a Chicago hardy fig. And then behind it is a Fuji apple that's about 3 years old. It was just planted as a little sapling. And then next to that is a Arkansas black, which unfortunately has cedar apple rust, and I don't think it's really ever going to produce, and it just doesn't look very happy or healthy either. And then this small little patch of kale produced all summer long. I'm used to my kale shriveling up, but we had a pretty cool summer, and these guys, believe it or not, just 6 or 7 plants made all the kale I could eat and blend, and still gave some away. And I have a smoothie, probably a green smoothie, at least 3 times a week. I try to get a 4th one in if I can. That's usually my breakfast. And if I have that a couple hours before I practice, I can usually practice without any indigestion. Well, anyway, that's the basic tour of the garden. I'm going to show you here's another strip of kale that I planted at that same time in mid-July, which usually you would not be able to plant here. But again, it was that cool spell, and it was enough time for the seedlings to get germinated and come up. Anyway, I need to harvest some of this kale. As soon as it starts touching the ground, that's when the slugs start to get a hold of it. Notice a lot more bug damage once it starts touching the ground, so I try to take them before that happens. I'm going to freeze a lot of kale this year, see how that works. I'm also going to make some kale chips. We're going to go over that process, hopefully, in future videos. Thanks for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you next time.